Dean's not here now. Oh, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for the delay here, technical difficulties. It's 6:33 and I'd like to call to order tonight's regular council meeting. I'd like to acknowledge with respect that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Colwood speaking people. And we're honored to have this opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. May I have a motion and seconder for the receipt of the near and long-term agenda and adoption of tonight's agenda as presented. Okay, Councillor Grove and Councillor Olsen second. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, that's any opposed? Carried, motion carried. Thank you. Mayor's message. I have a few things to pass on this evening. I'd first of all like to thank Gablecraft for sponsoring the Easter egg hunt on April 8th, Saturday night. That was pretty phenomenal. The response was, that was the biggest crowd I've ever seen here in Colwood. It was extremely well attended, and from the people from Colwood and some of our neighboring municipalities. I would also like to thank the many students from Royal Bay Secondary School who volunteered their time to help out with all the festivities and events. On Sunday, I had the honor of representing the city at the 106th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which was held at Veterans Memorial Park. The candlelight vigil ceremony was organized by the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 91. And if I could recommend in the future, if you could have the opportunity to attend the ceremony, I'd highly recommend it. It would certainly be appreciated by all our veterans here in the Western community. And I don't know if you know the historical significance of Vimy Ridge. The historians tell me that that's when we found nationhood, our victory at Vimy Ridge. We got to be at the peace signing table. Arts and Culture Colwood Society. There's a couple of events I just want to point out to everyone. The Arts and Culture Colwood Societies has a couple of events organized for this month. The first being held on this Saturday, April 15th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. at St. John the Baptist Heritage Church. This event is the first of 3 classical concerts being performed by the Cascadia Strings Quartet. The first event is entitled Nordic Dreams, which will feature a selection of music from various Scandinavian composers. The second event organized by the Society is the annual Bloom Show, which will be held on Saturday, 22nd of April and Sunday, the 23rd of April from 10 to 4 p.m. at the Pendray House at 3221 Heather Bell Road. Your support by attending would be greatly appreciated. The Juan de Fuca Performing Arts Center Society is putting on an event tomorrow, the 12th of April from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Royal Colwood Golf Course. And lastly, this week marks the, from the 9th of April to the 15th is the Tsunami Preparedness Week here in BC. Colwood's emergency planning team has coordinated a high ground hike contest for residents and visitors to learn where to find high ground in Colwood in the event of a tsunami. In actual fact, I was really surprised that it's just a strip of land actually that's actually affected. It's not as widespread as I thought it would be. Information is posted on our city website, and if you have any questions, please contact our Assistant Fire Chief, Scott Abramson, at the Fire Hall for more info. And please subscribe to the West Shore Alerts to ensure you receive emergency information specific to Colwood. We are Zone D. I did my homework. Item 4, adoption of minutes. May I have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes of the regular council meeting held March 27th as presented, and that the minutes of the emergency planning committee held on January 17th, 2023 be received. Okay, Councillor Jensen and Councillor Olsen. Are there any errors, omissions, or discussion? Those items? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Public participation. We've had 5 written submissions that have been received and have been circulated to council and will be appended to the agenda tomorrow. No one registered right now from what I understand electronically. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak tonight? Please.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Linda Noe. I live at Propeller Place in Colwood here. And I just wanted to say a few words about item 7.3 on the agenda under new business. I am in support of the motion brought by Councillor Olsen on 27th of March regarding regulating the use of pesticides within Colwood. USA's Medical Research Agency, National Institutes of Health, notes that the use of pesticides containing synthetic chemicals that are known or probable carcinogens increases humans' risk of various acute and chronic cancers. David Suzuki Foundation notes wild pollinators such as butterflies and bees are crucial to human survival. Climate change, land development, and pesticide use threaten their survival and therefore ours as well. If the pesticide use bylaw is adopted in Colwood, it would be beneficial to include the names of the synthetic chemicals contained in the prohibited pesticides, such as, but not limited to, mecoprop, 2,4-D, dicamba, and glyphosate. And I'd like to add to that when the question was posted posed last fall at the all candidates meeting hosted by West Shore Chamber of Commerce and via each councillor's individual email as to whether Colwood should join the more than 40 BC cities and municipalities that have adopted pesticide use bylaws. It was very encouraging that all 6 of the now sitting council members were supportive at that time. I'm hopeful council will consider directing staff to provide a report and draft bylaw to regulate the use of cosmetic pesticides on residential and municipal properties in Colwood. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other members from the public wish to speak?
Hi, I'm Judy Knowles, 274 Belmont Road. And speaking on behalf of the Citizens Environmental Network in Colwood, I would like to express our support for the proposed restrictions on pesticide use. When I was working as a landscaper, I saw a lot of overuse and misuse of pesticides in lawns and gardens, resulting in the destruction of many beneficial insects and soil organisms. Damage from the misuse of pesticides continues up the food chain, affecting all of our ecosystems, including fish, amphibians, birds, and animal species. And there is increasing knowledge of how human health is also affected by long-term exposure to many pesticides. Even in agricultural applications, pesticide use is being questioned and greatly reduced. But certainly for cosmetic purposes, there is no need to risk our health and the health of the ecosystems of the planet. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Judy. Any other speakers? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to a notice of motion. I have Councillor Ward, who has a notice of this item will be brought up to council for discussion at the April 24th, 2023 council meeting. And Councillor Ward, if I can hand it over to you just to read your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am recommending that we amend bylaw 1890, the council procedure bylaw of 2021, to provide the public with the option to participate at the beginning of each item under new business or in the current public participation at the outset of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ward. Moving on, new business. Our first item under new business is council remuneration review report. And Joe MacDonald, Consulting Services. Is Joe going to actually speak to this at all? Do you know offhand, Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Your Worship. She is actually online available for any questions for council.
Okay, I'll just, the report has been issued and I'll just open the floor for any questions that you may have for Joe on her consulting report. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair, I have just a question about the process in reviewing comparables across the region. I noted that View Royal utilized the same services, same consultant, and the wording was very explicit in that it was recommended to council there that they adopt a 75th percentile, which they subsequently did. And I'm wondering through the chair if we can understand why that approach and recommendation was made, if in fact that's accurate, versus the methodology that was employed here, where council was asked to pick their own percentile.
Ms. MacDonald.
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. That was the direction that I was given by the city of View Royal. So as similar, it was a slightly different process, but the direction I was given by the city of Colwood was to the 50th percentile, whereas the town of View Royal was the 75th. And my recommendation reflects that.
Great, thank you. And I did have another question here. Just on the compensation report itself. Sorry, I'm just having difficulty pulling it up here. I'm wondering, I know Colwood has an existing bylaw where councillor remuneration is derived from 50% of the mayor's salary, and yet the report recommends a lower percentage than that, and that's a deviation from, you know, how we've approached it and how other municipalities approach it. I'm wondering if you can explain why the 50% was altered downward.
I don't believe it was. The survey demonstrated, I believe it was 47% was the common from the survey, but I recommended that it stay at 50% for the city. If you turn to page 8 of the report, it says the process for subsequent annual compensation adjustments. In the middle, I addressed the bylaw and my recommended changes to the bylaw, and those were two. One, to remove the tie to the annual QP staff increases, and the second was that the compensation for councillors be set at 50% of the adjusted rate for the mayor.
Okay, thank you. I just, I guess the math isn't quite adding up for me. When I look at, if I go back up to page 5, under the mayor compensation, the total for 2023 is 55,785, and council is set at 25,900. Is that then at 47%, but the recommendation is 50, or am I reading this incorrectly?
That I don't know what percentage that is. It was just, that was the chosen target of what the survey showed. However, in the recommendations, I'm saying go to the target for the mayor and then take 50% of that. So I believe I see where you're coming from now.
Right. Okay. So if I think we're on the same page here, sorry, Joanne. So if I'm reading you correctly, then if the mayor's wage at the 50th percentile is 55,785, the councillor salary would be 50% of that, or 27,892.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Councillor Day.
Thank you. My question is in regard to the comparators. The one thing I wasn't able to determine is which of the comparison municipalities have recently conducted a review and which are yet to conduct a review?
The, just a minute here. I did promise all of those who were participating that it would be confidential information, so there wouldn't be any specific identifiers in them. In terms of the ones that are have not yet set their 2023 rates, those three were here. Those were Saanich, Brock, and North Saanich had not yet set their 2023 rates.
So just three municipalities.
Three of them had not yet set the rate for this year. For various reasons, they generally had either they normally conduct their own surveys mid-year and then adjust retroactively, or one had just decided not to increase this year for the time being. They weren't sure if they were going to or not later on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions come from council? Councillor Ward?
Not a question, but I think it's important that when we talk about this, we recognize that, well, obviously it's not an opportune time. This ideally would have been resolved in the third year of a previous council per UBCM guidelines. I would acknowledge that previous council did make an attempt to remove this from the table for this council. Unfortunately, some of us at this table didn't feel that process or methodology was the right one. I think it's important for me personally to clarify that I had questions around the CRD component of compensation. As you know, Colwood has one representative full-time to the CRD essentially, and that's the mayor, and there is compensation associated with that. But it's important to note that subsequent to my neophyte position pre-election, I've looked at that with a more strategic context, and I looked to Saanich, for example, where they elect the CRD directors. The mayor isn't necessarily even a CRD member. And Colwood, as we grow, if we look towards the future, there's the potential that we would do something similar here. So my initial thought was to entwine the CRD compensation with mayoral compensation. And subsequently, if I take that long view, I have to back away from that. I believe that it could cause problems for future councils, and I think certainly having debated this issue long and in great detail, I'd like to minimize that. I believe I'm not overstating it, that my colleagues at this table would like to kind of put this to bed for a fairly long period in the future, so the future councils don't have to address it. I also think that it's imperative that we balance the responsibility to the taxpayer and financial prudence with ensuring that the wage, while certainly not market for the type of work that you do, is reasonable enough that it's going to encourage diversity of candidates in future elections. So I think where we net out at the 50th percentile at 50% of the mayor's wage is reasonable. It's a reasonable number, but what it does is it also reflects a commitment from the members of council to essentially give up a significant amount of their time, which is a component of elected office. So I think we strike a balance there, and that many of us are working for much less than we would in the private sector, but we knew that when we got into this. And I think this wage softens it a little bit, but doesn't override the volunteer commitment, if you will, that we put into the city. So I'm going to support the motion, understanding that it is 50% of the 50th percentile for the mayor. I would like to add, though, and perhaps make an amendment in a moment, but I'd let Councillor Grove get his words in. I would like to ensure that we have a formal review in the third year of each council term. And of course, I agree with the consumer index component that's already in there. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks very much. Councillor Grove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And Just for me, I don't have any questions. They were duly answered. That's great. Thank you for that. I would like to point out that I, from the beginning, thought a path to 24 or 5,000 was good for me. I'd be there. I am retired. I don't depend on it. I also agree that the council deserves to be paid well, but I'd like to point out that in my experience, be as it may, paying those positions. And I feel that the civic duty that I feel I'm part of is a big part of what I get back. So it's a tricky question. I will support this motion because we do want to get on this. And we do, I think, need to remember what we went through here so that next election, we're going to get this right, perhaps a little sooner in the summer. I think we do it earlier, but I guess summer vacation cuts into it. Anyhow, thank you very much. And I think that's all I've got to say right now. That's good. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just want to speak to my experience over the 20 years, because it's kind of rare that councils get to hear kind of how it's been for a very long time. And I guess one of the, paying a reasonable honorarium to the members of council is important to attracting and retaining good people at the council table, because I think almost everyone, regardless of how much effort they do or don't put into the position, you give up quite a bit of something in order to be here. Whether it's promotions that you don't apply for because you're too busy, or jobs that you don't take on, or there's a certain amount of, it can be very hard on your reputation to take a political point of view. That's why a lot of people avoid talking politics, is because it's difficult to agree to disagree politely sometimes. So I just want to make sure that what we do here rewards the people who do great things for their community. And there are a lot of people who've done some pretty wonderful things to create this community, whether you were organizing and devising events for the community to participate in, or you were ensuring the safety of your community by volunteering with radio committees or emergency planning endeavors, or increasing the engagement of the community in the issues that matter. It's really important. So I really believe that the formal review every term is really an important basis to consider. And it's also really important, and I haven't found a good way to do it, which is why I'm not bringing forward a motion. But sometimes you have some really great people, but they have really busy jobs and they're on council and you value their opinion. You're so glad that they're here, but they take on much fewer of the time commitments that may be necessary to do the work of the council. And so at some point in time, I'm hoping we can find a way to recognize the people who really, pick up the slack when other people are not able to make those other commitments. I know the mayor has picked up a lot of slack recently, especially. There's just been so many commitments. I know in the past I've been on 6 or 7 committees, and I've actually had to tell my committees, okay, don't expect me to be preparing something for you for every single meeting, because I have 7 meetings every month and I can't manage that level of output. So pick your items that you really need me for. And I think there needs to be some way for that to be recognized in the contribution to the community. And I haven't found it yet. I know other communities have grappled with the CRD, some of their committees, they pay per meeting that you attend. Or even one time a member of our council actually kept a report card on the councillors and how many meetings you attended or how many meetings you missed. Not that that always was a perfect snapshot, but that I think that is important. So I'm just really hopeful that everyone will consider adding into our recommendations that we keep talking about these issues, because it's really important to have people feel that it's not detrimental to contribute to your community, that neither your career nor your finances are going to be terribly impacted by what you do, and that it encourages people to understand the commitment that we are trying to make. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Day. Councillor Jensen?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I like what's here. I like some of the discussion. I don't really have a lot to say other than I think this is long overdue. Everybody at this table is worth this and much, much more. However, I do find myself in agreement with Councillor Grove and his position on you do this as a labor of love and out of your civic duty than for the small amount of money that is in exchange for the money. But I did have a question, and I'm not sure who this should be directed to, Mr. Mayor, but this discussion about these changes and the new amounts here, that's for this term, and there's no indication here on when this actually starts, whether it's backdated to when we were sworn in, or whether this is forward looking or what. I wonder if we can get some clarity on that.
Okay, I was actually going to go to Mr. Earl on that. Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Your Worship. We would bring back a bylaw that would likely be backdated to January of 2023. And we would, with the report when it came back, bring back, as we did with the last report, options for whether or not this should be phased in or brought in all at once. So that will come back with the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to wrap this up, seeing no other comments here. Yeah, this is certainly a really was a tense discussion. I can tell you that. I was very uncomfortable with this whole subject, to tell you the truth. This is the only place that I know of where, you know, you approve your own wages. It's just the weirdest thing. I'm trying to get used to this. The municipal government, it's just different to me, and it's foreign to me. And it's, you know, it's never a win-win situation. It never is. And but, you know, at least I feel in good conscience, I could say we actually followed a darn good process. And I'd like to thank you, Joe, for helping us get through this. You've clearly used the UBCM guidelines, which I was so happy to see. And I just felt it was a lot more professionally done. The numbers, thank God, were less than what was recommended before, from my perspective, that is. But it's a difficult thing to go through. And, you know, in future, I think that we should always use a consultant to help us with this, to get through this. And if it's a lesson learned that we have on this, you know, we actually got caught up in we're approving our own going forward, which is kind of awkward. But it is what it is. And I'd rather have it done right than done wrong and regretting it later on. So thank you very much, Joe, for doing this. Like I said, it is very difficult. I think everyone knows I was pretty principled on this, and I would have been happy with a lot less myself personally. But you know, it's funny, you know, I got so much satisfaction going out to the event on Saturday, seeing our community happy. And I mean, genuinely happy, you know, they stopped and they talked to every one of us, I think that was there, the councillors, and there's this silent majority that, you know, when they tell you you're doing a good job, that's all I need. So, you know, I think it was, I think that, yeah, this is just a tough subject to broach, and we're all at different times in our careers. I can tell you that. I mean, I'm the retired guy, but I had a pretty lucrative consulting business that was going on before. I can't do any of that now. Stop zero. It's impossible. So I do understand that, you know, how people feel about this. So I do have empathy, although you might all think that I don't have empathy. I do have empathy, believe me. So I think what happened in the end was fair. It's a fair, that the way that it came out. We're still going to get probably slammed by some, but it is what it is. And it's certainly, you know, quite a few percentage points less than what was recommended before. So again, I'd just like to thank you, Joe, for your hard work on this. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
And if I can get a motion on the floor then, please. Okay, Councillor Ward. There you go.
Mr. Mayor, I will make the motion that I alluded to earlier. I'm going to add one slight amendment to it, though, based on the feedback from Mr. Earl. I would make the motion that we accept the proposal to set the mayor's salary at the 50th percentile and set the council at the 50% of said wage. Further, I would, in that motion, include that we adopt the recommended process for subsequent annual compensation adjustments, with the addition of specification that the review in each term occurs in the third year of the term. And lastly, that the report or the remuneration bylaw that would come forward from staff simply identify that the increase is retroactive to January 1st, 2023 with no phasing. It just occurs as a one-time issue, and then we can vote on it and be done with it. You don't have to include the last part.
Is there a seconder so we can get some discussion on this? Okay, Councillor Day. Councillor Grove, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to speak to the third year. I understand and I think I like it, except that we're doing a comparative where no other municipalities' new level would be available perhaps until the fourth year. Just a thought. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as a possible data shortage, right? How are you going to develop a comparative 50th percentile with our 15, 20 other municipalities if we're the only ones doing it in the third term or third year? Or if I missed something there.
Councillor Day and then Councillor Ward.
I'm just thinking that we could ask our consultant for her take on that, but I do note that at least 3 of our comparators are yet to do a review. So there will be at least 3 new data sets out of the 20.
Okay. Would you like to comment on that, Joe, at all?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. The majority of the local governments do have a standard process such as yours, where they will be increasing every year based on the CPI or whatever other process they happen to have. And that will go on every year. So in the third year, for the most part, we would still get valuable data. Some of them will decide to do a survey once in a while. And that will just sort of do a little bit of a double check and a readjust. For the most part, once you're on this kind of a path, it should be quite consistently close to the 50th percentile. So while we may not have 100% information received, I think you would receive enough to be able to say, yes, you're still on the right track or not. It would only be a small number that would do a survey after that, and the rest of them will be following their path.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I appreciate what Councillor Grove has raised. I think though, for me, I think we need to let history be our guide. I'd quote the UBCM best practice and guide on the Council and Board Remuneration Guide for September 2019, which is the most recent one, where they talk about the election cycle as a factor. And, you know, obviously they state that, you know, change to elected officials remuneration is an item of interest and discussion. You know, it's going to incur a lot of scrutiny and discussion. I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but what they have said here is that it may not be useful for remuneration to dominate public discourse, particularly in the lead up to an election when other important issues also deserve attention. To avoid this situation, local governments should consider conducting reviews and reporting results at least 1 year before the next election. And if the most recent election is a guide, we can see exactly how it you know, feeds into politicking, into, you know, the election itself, and distracts from other issues. You know, so my suggestion was based on the UBCM guide, which, you know, specifically speaks on aiming to avoid that. And as Councillor Day indicated, there will be other comparators out there. I would rather err on the side of entering into a discussion, even if it ends up being deferred in year 3, than leaving it until the 11th hour in year 4, and again, seeing a bit of a circus come election time. Thank you.
Okay. I just have one comment. Could you put up the Councillor Ward's Okay, there was one part where you mentioned that you wanted it all now effective January 1st in one tranche, correct? So that's missing there. So that's where I'm having a little issue with, because before I would vote on that, I want to understand the impact of that, you know, to the taxpayers. You know, I was hoping that it would be over a 2-year period. Like it lessens it, but I don't know the exact impact and how we're paying for this yet. So I guess that's what I need to know before I would agree to this particular motion. Any comments, Jen?
Certainly, the current 2023 remuneration budget was approximately $140,000. If we move to the 50th percentile, as the recommendation is before you, we're looking at increasing the need. That annual budget would be $223,000 for 2023. So we're going to require an additional $81,000 and change this year. And so that funding would ensure that we have the necessary funding effective January 1st for the lift to take effect.
So that would be a tax lift of about 0.5%, correct?
Correct. Yeah, about 0.45% property tax increase. You haven't received recommendations from administration in terms of proposed funding for this. It's a phased process, so we were looking for council's feedback tonight on where we go in terms of what percentile we seek. If I were to speak right now on that topic, my recommendation would be don't defer the tax increase, incur the tax increase if you are in fact moving a recommendation to increase the remuneration effective January 1st, 2023. We have not yet brought forth property tax rates for 2023. And there are a couple of options. My recommendation would be that we do increase taxation, the approximate 0.45%, so that we have the sustainable funding. We incur that this year rather than deferring it. An alternate funding option would be that this year's increase be funded by surplus, and then next year's budget would incur the property tax increase. So there are options to consider. But at the 50th percentile, we need approximately another $80,000.
Okay. So is that something that you can bring back with the bylaw then?
Absolutely.
Would that be okay? Councillor Ward?
Yeah, I think
Instead of making it like hard right now, like let's take a look at that, because we have a couple options that we can do it the way that we want to do it. It's not saying that, you know, I think we're saying it's effective January 1st, but the options and how we want to pay for this. I guess that's not even on the table. Yeah, so. But yeah, we'll talk about that as separate. So no, yeah, your motion doesn't affect whether it's how we're paying for it. So I'm okay with it.
It's only about how we slice.
How we slice and dice it, right? Okay. Councillor Day?
Thank you. And just based on that discussion that we just had, I think we're at 6.43 for our budget lift thus far in our budget deliberations. So adding the other 0.45% that this would incur, that still keeps us under 7%. And that still keeps us within the realm of inflation in our region this year. So I think we can certainly slice and dice it as to how we do that within the budget, but it's not an unreasonable, terribly awful, difficult thing to do, even though every penny does count for every single one of us.
Okay. Are you okay with the motion right now as worded up here, Councillor Ward? Okay. Yeah, it still doesn't have that. No, that's there. No, it's the one that no phasing. It's just one shot, bang, it's done. Get the pain done over with.
I think that.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah, will. Yeah, oh, it does. Well, that's CPI. They're talking CPI on that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
I see.
Yeah. That was my whole point there.
You could do it by adding after January 23rd in the first part.
Yeah.
Effective January 1st.
Okay, right on the first line, you mean?
Yeah, right on the first, actually at the end of the sentence, probably looks better.
Sorry, I can't hear because the mics aren't on.
Oops.
Thank you.
Yeah, so what you're saying on the very first sentence, it just at the very end there, you just put effective January 1st, 2023.
Perfect.
Is that okay, Mr. Earl? Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll see no other discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? So that is unanimous and its motion is carried. Okay, 7.2. I brought this one up. It's paid parking on private lands. It was a notice of motion from the last council meeting. And I brought this up because I had a couple of constituents who were very bothered by what was happening down with the Ani development. What happened down there, I'll just put everything into context here. What happened is there was parking for the residents, the residential area, there's parking for the businesses. And so what was happening, for what I understand right now, was that some of the business parking was being used by the people that lived in the residential apartments. And therefore there was not parking for the customers. So Ani came down and says, well, we'll give you an hour and a half or 2 hours. I heard two numbers. I think I saw in the meter it was an hour and a half. Yeah, an hour and a half. You get free parking and you have to have an app. You have to have minutes or whatever we call it, data to do it. And some people didn't have data and it caused quite the commotion. And there was a lot of nasty emails, but the problem was that it is on private property and we can't go back and sort of say, now you got to do what we tell you to do. I mean, it is on private property, but that's what the situation is. So it's certainly worthy of discussion because as we go forward, you're going to start seeing more of this, the residential slash retail type of combinations of developments in future. And so the whole question, that this whole parking question has to be discussed by council at some time. And so we must also get it out in the open and come up with a policy. Now, I try to phone around with what other municipalities were, what they were doing. I get some information, but then I thought to myself, why am I doing this? Staff is supposed to do this. So the recommendation that I have is that I wanted staff to investigate and return to council with options to either prohibit or allow, whatever it is, the practice of charging for parking on private lands as part of future rezoning applications. So it's a fairly big subject. And I thought the staff could do all the homework on this and come back to us with various options. So I'm just putting this all in context, and I'll certainly open up the floor here. Councillor Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we're doing our comparatives with the View Royal. So here we have one from Eagle Creek Village. I took a picture. I should have sent it around to everyone. I wasn't thinking. Maximum 3-hour parking, Eagle Creek Village. It's a big yellow sign out front of Quality Foods. Customers only. Violators will be ticketed, towed, or immobilized. This is monitored and operated by Robbins. The reason I say that is because I think that this is an issue that appears everywhere, that Eagle Creek Village is, I see it as being very similar to Colwood Corner situation. The problem being, I believe, is that the residents tend to park in those places, plugging them up. Every place I've had my business in my entire life, there's been an issue with employee parking, plugging up potential customer parking. I think that the issue is important. I don't particularly like the wording of this recommendation, asking them about the practice of charging for parking on private lands. I think we need answers to the issue, but it's really broader than just trying to nail people for paid parking, which in and of itself is perhaps recommended for environmental reasons, because these parking spots are not free. In fact, they're very expensive, and they should, in my opinion, be paid for to some degree, at least by the users. I think that's all I have to say, except that I think that it's a great idea that we would get staff to investigate this thing, but it might take them a while. It's a big, I think, yeah.
Councillor Ward, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my issue with this is the wording, sort of leading wording of the motion, that staff return to council with options to prohibit the practice of charging for parking, whereas I prefer to see that they simply investigate current practices in other municipalities. Having done some research on my own, I can say that I'd be shocked if they didn't find the same result, that the trend really is to allow for the practice of charging for parking in these developments, simply because for environmental reasons, land use reasons, density reasons, we're seeing parking reductions in high density areas where you combine commercial and residential with easy access to transit and so on. It allows for council to have flexibility to reduce that. I mean, ultimately, I think we have to remember that parking is subsidized or paid for by somebody, and the decoupling that can happen in these scenarios where a developer can, if they're on a major transit route, for example, if we're using our sort of triangle gateway area, we can allow them to reduce the parking minimum slightly, provide some transit amenities and other things, and then they decouple the parking cost from the cost of the units, therefore in theory making the units a little bit more affordable, and not having people who aren't, say, owning 2 cars subsidizing the folks that use 1 car or even don't use a vehicle at all. Now granted, this is slower to probably emerge in the West Shore, particularly in Colwood, than we see in more urban areas, but it is coming, and it is a reality certainly in Victoria and Saanich and other municipalities. So I would hesitate to limit ourselves with a policy that prohibits charging for parking for those reasons. And frankly, personally, I just feel it's a bit of government overreach. I think at the end of the day, it's a private development. And I say that because and it's difficult. I hate disagreeing with our mayor here, but the community outcry over this, I monitored it pretty closely in social media and things, was really around, as you stated, Mr. Mayor, around the execution of the parking more so than the practice, right? There was an hour and a half of free parking for shoppers there, which is more than enough time generally to go into the grocery store, the pet store, all those other businesses that are there. Where it was flawed was with the new technology that they deployed, the app that they used. As you stated, if you needed data and other things, it made it very cumbersome. And then naturally there's outcry. And when people are angry about something, they need to point somewhere. And well, this must be a city problem. This is the developer problem. And in reality, it was an issue that was fairly easily mitigated. You just needed to use technology that's, you know, not for the early adopters. It's done throughout the CRD. So, you know, it was a bit of a tempest in a teapot for me. And I think we're being a little bit reactionary, you know, if we seek to put a policy in as a result of frankly, a bit of a sense of entitlement to have free space as long as we want. So I would certainly support the motion if it were amended to investigate versus lead down the prohibition route. So.
I'd be happy to change that motion actually. So actually, I didn't even read it per the way it was written. Okay, yeah, Councillor Jensen, could you just put to investigate instead of to prohibit? Or regulate, yeah. Investigate.
I mean,
I think it's.
Let's stick with investigate because we
I
may
like
choose
the
to do
investigate.
nothing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's why I like the investigate, yep.
Just a couple of thoughts, your worship, and you know, I agree a lot with a lot of what has been said. And I said the issue largely that I saw, the focus was on the commercial parking for the businesses that were there, and I do believe that the proprietor does have some right in that regard, as we see it a lot, most malls or strip malls and what have you. The issue in this particular case for me is that development, I'm led to believe from a resident and someone who lives directly behind on Colwood Crescent, that the owner of that building is charging an additional fee for a parking spot when you rent a place. So then what's happening is it's forcing residents that perhaps that $100 or $200, whatever it is, I don't have any figures on that, is a deal breaker, which is then forcing that individual to have their car out on the street. In my mind, we've done a lot of work on being, you know, quite precise with the amount of parking that we're demanding from developers. And yes, there's been some amendments out in the last couple of years. In my mind, that spot belongs to that unit. That's the work that we did as a council at this table, units and spots, and we came up with the formula. You know, and in my mind, that spot comes with that unit, period. Now, if the developer decides to crunch their numbers and you know, charge 50 or $100 extra and build that into the rental, and it comes with the parking spot, I'm fine with that, because then the person renting can make that informed choice about whether they're going to live there or not. The situation there right now currently is causing some grief in the neighborhood beyond the parking plaza. And this is caused directly by that additional fee for the people that are living there. That's why people are dumping their cars out in the mall lot. That's why their cars are being parked on Colwood Crescent. Further to that, along the same sort of line, where people are habitating together, as in, you know, say a married couple that goes in different directions. You have two vehicles, and they perhaps only want to pay for one spot, and then the other one goes out on the street somewhere or into the plaza. So I think this particular issue is a direct result of some questionable decision making on the part of the proprietor of the entire complex, is my opinion only. So where I would like to see some work done here is at the development stage, where we do have certain requirements. There's those spots that we decided for those particular number of units belong to those units. You know, if the person moves in, decides that they want to rent it out to somebody else, which you see like in downtown Vancouver, and someone doesn't have a car, that's a different matter. But for me, the spots go with the units, period. And
those are some of my thoughts, and I'm hoping for some of that kind of feedback from staff when it comes back.
That's a great point, Councillor Jensen, because I was asking Langford because I guess they have a bylaw and that's what was happening. So they make it come with that apartment. They couple it, so it prevents that from happening. So
Yes.
that's their bylaw actually.
That's where I would like to see us with some precise language and at the development, through our development services department.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I think that parking is actually a really big issue, and we are going to need to deal with it. There's a variety of approaches throughout the region. Those of you who are following what Victoria is doing right now with their Harris Green project, they're proposing 1 parking spot for 3 apartments there, 0.3 of a parking space per apartment. And they aren't linking that to how many bedrooms there are in the apartment either. And I understand the reasoning for doing that. You know, downtown is really stuffed with cars. There's not enough parking pretty much anywhere. And environmentally, we would really love to see fewer cars on the road, creating pollution and traffic jams and noise and all of the problems that go with it. But people need to go places, and they need to go places that transit doesn't serve very well. It serves very few places very well. And so there is a balance, and here in Colwood, there is a balance, and it is rapidly getting difficult. It's getting difficult in older neighborhoods that are close to newer, higher density areas of development where parking for suites or kids or whomever is growing and spilling into neighborhoods such that, you know, people, I've talked to people in Colwood who are defensively parking on the street so they don't have to deal with, rather than in their driveway where they have enough room, but who don't want that guy with the weird car that leaks oil in front of their house. That's how they can deal with it. I see the side of the road on Goldstream Avenue in Colwood between Sooke Road and Whale Road. Regularly, there are vehicles parked all over the boulevard. They're compressing the soil, making it difficult for the beautiful trees that they're parking between to have a sustainable root structure supported by the soils that have been there for a very long time, but have been driven over year after year. And I don't want our commercial developments. I'm very, very pleased that we have, you know, a beautiful new bank branch, a beautiful new pet store that's been all redeveloped in the Colwood Corners development. And I don't want them to suffer from people believing that there's no point in going to that store because they don't have the app or the cell phone or the latest technology to allow them to park there safely and conveniently. So those are all a lot of pressures that every municipality is dealing with. In Langford, it's very difficult to park. Their streets have no parking. I work in an office in Langford, and there are regularly delivery trucks parked in the middle of the road that you have to go around. There are people parking in places that are not reserved for them. There are issues where any unoccupied piece of land may be subject to homeless encampments or undesirable goings on. There is a bigger problem, and what I don't want to see happen is that the commercial developments that we work so hard to get are squeezed out based on it being an uncomfortable place to be. So we need to address parking. We need to encourage people to travel by means other than automobiles, of course, where that's reasonable and can be accomplished. But we have to look at the whole picture. So I'm really looking forward to the report coming back and a good discussion where we talk about supporting our businesses, supporting our environment, and supporting the people who want to live here.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Councillor Grove first time.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to say, as we change our parking bylaws, we do, this is strategic. It's in our planning. I've heard it over and over again throughout the months. We see it in other municipalities. That's all great. But I think what we really need, and this is perhaps the opportunity, is to get some hard data back. We talk about metrics, get some hard data back on the use of the cars, people, how many people are living in these units and how many cars they have and where they're using them. We need to need that data to make any decision, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Ward.
I think it's important just to clarify the record that speaking to what Councillor Jensen was saying about how this evolved or happened, far be it for me to defend the developer, but this was a 2017 council decision where they were granted a parking variance of 422 spaces less. So, you know, I think if we're going to point fingers, in fairness, we need to look in the mirror here. We allowed this project to reduce their parking component by 400 spots. And at the time, and there's folks quoted in the Goldstream article, including Mr. Bourhill and former mayor and others saying, well, spillover could be a problem in the future. Well, the chickens have come home on this one. So, you know, it's a lesson learned in some ways that you can have the best intentions. You reduce the parking because we want people to take transit and other things. But, you know, are we prepared to manage, you know, what comes about? I still think it's not necessarily the wrong move. You have to move towards the future, but you need to address, okay, what does that look like, you know, within the commercial plaza and on the residential streets? Do we need residential parking permits, other things to manage it? So I just wanted to point that out, though, that this was not solely on the developer.
Yeah, Dean, we can say we weren't on council this time. We're not going to say anything, Cynthia. Okay, I am going to, seeing no other comments, I'm going to call the question. Actually, no, I didn't have a mover or seconder. Can I get a mover and seconder? Okay, Councillor Grove and Councillor Jensen. And call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion's carried. No opposed. Okay, Councillor Olsen, your time in the spotlight. Over to you. You can motivate.
Yeah. I don't talk a lot, so when I have an opportunity, they tease me. But I wanted to speak to this one because it's really important to me, as it has been with many other people in the community. We know that there's 4 communities within the province that have adopted a pesticide use bylaw for cosmetic use. Only 4 of those municipalities are within the CRD, that being Oak Bay, Victoria, Esquimalt, and Saanich. Pesticides are harmful to human health, to our environment. They are harmful to our wildlife and to our pets. They're devastating to our bees, and they contaminate our soil and our waterways. Pesticides can be linked to several types of cancer and can severely affect fertility and can cause severe hormone disruption. My intention with this proposed bylaw is to encourage safe alternatives and to eliminate the use of harmful pesticides for cosmetic use in Colwood, specifically Kill-X and Par-3, among many other chemicals. I do believe that this is an opportunity for Colwood to lead by example in the West Shore as a community that is committed to environmental stewardship. And quite simply, I think that this is the right thing to do. So.
Thank you very much, Councillor Olsen. Councillor Jensen.
If Councillor Olsen is moving that, I'm happy to second that, Your Worship, and that I do have a question or two.
Okay, so mover is Councillor Olsen, seconded by Councillor Jensen. And please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I did have a question about, I'm hopeful, or I'm hoping that when this does come back, we speak to the availability and the sale of these products within our community as well, not just the use. I know it specifies use, but I just wonder if we're only talking about use by homeowners and by our staff, but yet you can still buy it, you know, down the way. I wonder if there's any feedback on that.
Well, if I can speak to that, I do know that, and I believe I'm correct in saying that you can't prohibit the purchase of harmful pesticides, unfortunately. It is not something that you, but you can't stop people from purchasing it. However, we can, with this is more of a reactive bylaw. So this is something that I do recognize is going to be difficult to police in the community. I don't anticipate or expect our bylaw to be driving around and trying to find people, using Kill-X on their lawn. Again, it is reactive. And I think that with some education and guidance from the city that we can encourage people, on safe alternatives. And I think just having a bylaw in place, people will think twice about reaching for chemicals and, hopefully lean on the city for some guidance. But yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering if we'd add the word with pesticide use, if we should add the word herbicide, if there's some reason to do that, or if it's not necessary. Herbicide speaks to the weeds plant, and the pesticide, as I understand, is more like insect related. The other thing is you talk about the use of the word cosmetic, and I know that there's, I guess you could call it agricultural applications beyond the cosmetics of it. Roundup is often used as a preparatory to the gardening area, just to strip the weeds, or in really stubborn locations where it's not so much necessarily even cosmetic, but preparing of ground for perhaps food production. Why you would do that, I don't know, but apparently it happens. Anyway, I'm just questioning that about adding the word herbicide, and perhaps the word cosmetic is a bit restricting, because I would like to see it, make sure that it includes everything that's not necessary or chemicals that are deemed dangerous to human and animal natural health.
Councillor Olsen, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I think that the request was to have staff draft up a bylaw that would include listing. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of great bylaws in place. Saanich has a great bylaw in place that does, list all of these pesticides, herbicides. And I do realize that there are going to be times when, there is going to be a need to use a certain chemical, if it is an invasive species or something, an insect that is threatening human health, that there is always going to be a reason that the city might need to use, something that we would prefer they didn't. But again, it has been asked that staff would draft up a bylaw, so we would have a chance to review that before, and have any feedback or opportunity to make any statements on that.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I recall many years ago that the CRD actually drafted the model bylaw that probably most of those 4 other communities' bylaws may be, at least in part, based on. I also know that from our experience here in Colwood with some extremely invasive and very toxic weeds that we do have, the blessed milk thistle being one of them. There are occasionally, there is maybe a good reason to very occasionally need to use an herbicide to control something that is too difficult to control in another way. So there may be some exceptions. I trust that our staff will be able to bring back something that's useful and considers all of those issues going forward. I know that I have been gardening for some time now without any pesticides myself. And I have a pretty big wild yard. The bugs and the butterflies love me. So do quite a few weeds, which I have managed to, I find that the control, the physical control is actually more effective in my yard than any of the herbicides have been. And I did try those to begin with because it's a pretty daunting yard. So I think that when we get to having this report in front of us and are able to have the wisdom of our staff who've been dealing with a number of these noxious weeds for years, who are very involved in the invasive species management that so many of our wonderful groups are doing here in Colwood, we can come up with a good solution going forward that most people will find beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions or comments, I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion? And it's unanimous, motion's carried. It's 7.4. I guess, Mr. Andrews, you're on deck. Please, capital project sidewalk and bike lane program.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Let me just organize my notes and hopefully we can pull up the presentation with a couple of visual cues. Okay, so as with the, is this too loud if I do this? In the report were the preliminary designs for the next 5 sidewalk projects that we're currently designing. The report outlines those preliminary designs and some of the challenges that we'll be facing. And this presentation will just talk through some of those aspects that we are facing and trying to deal with as we go through from preliminary design through detailed design and then ultimately construction. I assume I have the thing here. Excellent. So as you've seen in the report, these are just a few of the things that we consider when we're designing sidewalks or really any new roads through town. It's not an exhaustive list. There are many other things like signage, line painting, master plans, and other standards that we must adhere to. But this is to try to demonstrate that it's often a balance between all these different aspects to try to realize a new sidewalk in an existing community. That's often one of the more difficult projects because a lot of the residents have owned and have maintained these boulevard areas for 20, 30, 40, who knows how long years, and see that piece of property as their own. So when we come in and want to put in a new sidewalk at wherever through that boulevard, we do get quite a bit of pushback, which you might have seen on some emails, and I'm sure you've talked to members of the community who one person maybe wants the new sidewalks and is 100% behind the building. The neighbor might greatly disagree with that and not want sidewalks and have a real problem with installing them. We have to balance all those different things with direction of council. We're putting in the sidewalk, so we have to deal with the repercussions of that new sidewalk in an old community, and having to tie that in is always a bit of a challenge. So,
Josh, are you willing to take questions?
Yes,
per slide or?
Absolutely. So please, anytime, feel free to stop me and ask
So
any
I just have
questions.
one question on this one. One of the major design considerations to me as an engineer would be that one of the top ones would be, I don't want to say maximize traffic flow because that implies speed. And I don't want that in there, but it's, efficient, effective traffic flow, so that we have that really nice traffic flow should be one of the top design considerations I would tend to think, right?
Yes, absolutely. Now, the ultimate cross-section of each of the streets are outlined in our transportation master plan.
Right.
So that thought and those thoughts when it comes to traffic flow are often, those conversations are done at that traffic master planning stage when we decide we want. So later on, you'll see a cross-sectional design for our collector roads. We have 3.3 meters. We've got the buffered bike lanes in this case. And so on and so forth. All those thoughts are behind how well traffic can flow for that collector road or for that local road.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so when we're doing a sidewalk, we're adhering to those previously decided cross sections. So one of the things I'd like to address first is actually the issue of site grading and tying into those existing driveways. So the picture you see here is just one example of trying to tie in the existing driveway grade to the new sidewalk. So when the sidewalk, there's no sidewalk before, so that existing driveway just tied directly into the road at some sort of grade change. The angle's not perfect in this picture, I admit, but you can see that there's a bit of a grade, a reverse grade back into the driveway. That's because when we put in the sidewalks, we need to have any drop of water that lands on the sidewalk itself must drain to the road, to the curb, and then ultimately to the catch basin that we've put in. So that means that the curb needs to be higher than the road, the sidewalk needs to be higher than the curb, and the back of the sidewalk needs to be angled so that it drains back towards the curb. So by the time you get to the back of the sidewalk, you're now 6, 7, 8 inches higher than the edge of the road. When before it was 6, 7, 8 inches lower at least when they tied in, we have this grade change that we need to deal with. And that's why often we'll have that buffer at the back of sidewalk before property line to give us some space to try to make that grade change work and tie in at an appropriate angle to that homeowner's property. So this is one of the, this wasn't too difficult to be fair, but it was a good picture to try to demonstrate that task we have. Furthermore, this is also from our building bylaw and an example of what we're trying to avoid. Now in our bylaw, we have, I think, a max 20% paved, but when we're actually building, we try to keep a max of 10 to 15% grade change from the driveway to the back of sidewalk. So to avoid situations like this, when a car might bottom out, and if it's the reverse, a car's nose might hit that sidewalk as they drive out. Those are the cases we're trying to avoid, and it depends on the car. If someone owns, a lowered, I don't know cars, but you know what I mean. One of those lowered cars that are barely clearing the ground, they might not be able to pop the curb, let alone a fairly big grade change. And again, because we're going into existing communities, someone might own that lowered Ford Fiesta or whatever you lower nowadays. Councillor Day, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to ensure that you're aware of the issues for wheelchairs, mobility devices, that the cross grade on sidewalks is quite important to those. So we're trying to nowhere near the 10%, but we don't want to have anything more than a 6% grade. And for the cross slope, the preference is to keep that down to like 3. Because what from trying to drive, a kid's buggy or whatever that has terrible steering, that as soon as the grade is significant, whatever your vehicle is trying to go down the hill, basically. And that is a real problem for people in non-motorized wheelchairs, particularly.
Absolutely. So it's hard to see in this. In fact, it might not be in this particular drawing, but we have a max crossfall on sidewalks. So I think it's 3%. Typical is 2.
Yeah.
So that also factors into that grade change because you'll go from 15% up to that 2% across the sidewalk. Equates to 17%, which is a decent grade change for a lowered Ford Fiesta to get across.
Yeah, for sure. I just even on areas there's going to probably be some places where you have to do some creative management to fit everything together. So I would just offer that if you had, at least one side of the sidewalk that had less of a grade, that somebody could actually get across, on one side, knowing that there's a fall somewhere else. That would be a much easier obstacle to navigate with some sort of texture change, color change, anything to denote, where your flat spot is for travel.
Noted. Thank you. I'll keep going then. So this is another example that on a road that we haven't yet come in to install new sidewalks. And I was hoping I'd get the click through to show the individual sidewalks as they come up. But these are sort of the two options that we've been discussing. The green being where the sidewalk approximately will end up if it was at the back of curb, with the bike lane sort of where you can see is almost existing at the side on the shoulder. The sidewalk being right at the back of curb gives us a little more ease of tying in. This is quite a steep driveway, so the tie-in at the back of sidewalk, which is now 6 inches, 7 inches higher, will slope back. If the property line is followed with the sidewalk, you'd be looking at the red outline for, pardon the drawing, but that's the red outline for that sidewalk. Because the grade needs to continue to drain back towards the road, the difference is not just 6 inches. At that point, you're talking about a couple feet, and suddenly you have also lost all the space to tie in your grade to meet the driveway and the grades you're looking at. In this one in particular, I don't have a solution to how I would make that work if it was at property line, just because the grades are so significant. But it exacerbates the problem is what I'm trying to demonstrate with this photo. Oh, yes. And finally, this was the cross section. So these are the cross sections that we're currently designing for our collector roads. So you can see the 3.3, you might not be able to see depending on how good your eyes are, but there's 3.3 meter driving lanes. You've got the 1.8 bike lanes. You've got the 0.7 meter painted. This is the painted buffer ones. And the new active transportation network plan would call for protected bike lanes where vehicles exceed 4,000 vehicles per day or at speeds in excess of 50 kilometers an hour. So Kelly Road, now we'll get to those roads specifically, but Kelly Road would certainly qualify for one of those. And although our designs right now don't show the protected bike lane, we'll be updating the designs as we go into detail to include the protected bike lanes on that stretch of Kelly Road that we'll be doing sidewalks. However, with both, at least Lagoon, because we've done the traffic count there, it was only 2,500 vehicles per day, and it's a posted speed limit of 40 kilometers an hour. So according to the new ATPM, it would not qualify for protected bike lanes. But if that's something that council would want to see, we can certainly include those. Be advised that it comes with a cost. Fulton as well, we expect is a lower vehicle count, and we'll conduct those counts before we finalize designs as well. Council, pardon me, seems to be a question.
Councillor Ward. Oh. Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to you, Josh, through the chair. I'm looking at this and I see the 3.3, as you mentioned, on a collector. If I'm not mistaken, it was Kelly identified as a, is it an arterial or collector? Sorry, I'll go where I'm going with the question here is that I'm wondering if we look at moving to protected bike lane versus buffered, for example, on arterials, do we gain some driving space back? Like for me, I'm looking at arterials particularly, but even collectors thinking that a lane width of 3.5 is really optimal versus the 3.3. BC Transit, for example, identifies 3.5 as their preferred width because it fits the Nova bus, the largest in their fleet. And I'm worried that if we're designing streets too narrow, particularly on the the bigger thoroughfares, we limit ourselves in future, you know, as they introduce different buses and different, you know, you even have the extended buses, sorry, those kind of things. So I guess what I'm looking for is to see, okay, can we push further into the property lines, you know, as we're supposed to do, I suppose, on these ones. And I reference what was then former Councillor Kobayashi's motion a number of years ago to make that the rule rather than the exception on, I believe, arterials for certain, perhaps collectors as well, that we aim to hit the property line wherever we can. I guess I think we're blessed in many ways. I know I digress here. We've got a lot of road width right now when we incorporate, you know, when we go back to the property lines where possible. And I would hate to see us sort of give that away. You know, if we have opportunity to maintain 3.5 lane widths and do protected bike lanes. So I know it was a very rambling question, and I'm sorry, but if it makes sense to you, maybe you can provide some context.
I'll try. And I might have to look at the director here for if he remembers the arterial cross section better than I do, because I believe, you know.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. The new TMP is actually going to address that conversation about interior roads specifically. We're going to come back with specific cross sections for the collector streets that are major. A street like Kelly is functioning probably more like a collector than an arterial, but from a volume point of view, it's probably got more like an arterial volume to it. So from that perspective, some of these streets will need to be looked at individually as opposed to this is a collector, this is an arterial. So we'll come back to council through the transportation master plan and actually give you those conversation points about what we're recommending. So some of the times, depending on the neighborhood, we'll want 3.3 just to keep speeds down. And we know that it's a transit route that's not a major transit route. So there's only the smaller buses. We want the speeds low for the vast majority of the traffic, which is localized traffic. Something like Sooke, where we're going to have significant trucks and so on, then we'll want 3.5 as our minimum standard. Machosen, Veterans Memorial, Latoria, those will be 3.5. But as much as we think we've got a lot of right of way, we actually don't. We start putting all the buffering in, all the protection, and everything else with a 20-meter right of way, especially when you start thinking about it's 4 lanes of traffic, not to you quickly run out of room. So there will be some compromises, and that's why we'll come back to council and have those discussions. And we'll make some individual decisions on some of these major streets that will have some impacts depending on those widths. I hope that helps.
So my questions were very similar, actually. And because every bit of reading I'm doing is on mass transit, it's going to get wider. This is what I'm reading. So I'm going, oh, so we're getting narrower and they're going wider. So it's kind of interesting. But I guess the other part of my question is this whole crazy, you could tell me if it's the flavor of the month or flavor of the week, this thing called curb plunking. You know, they're putting those big curbs in right now. So instead of having these little magic painted lines that you think you've got protection from cars with, you don't stand a chance, because once you crosses that line, you're toast. So they went with this thing called curb plunking, and I've seen them all over Sandwich now. They're just popping up everywhere, and some of them are pretty high. And I was kind of surprised. The older ones that people are driving up and getting stuck on. So I guess it does provide some protection. So is that I don't see that at all in any of our concepts. Is that something that you're considering right now?
Certainly, actually, as part of the 5-year financial plan, there's a budgeted item in there for 79,000 that council's committed to with regards to converting some of our buffered bike lanes, similar to what Sandwich is doing with basically most of that cross-sectional areas. Think of it like a parking curb in a parking lot. It's about 6 inches high. I think it's 8 inches across, or I should say 150 millimeters, 200 millimeters. I'm not sure what conversion you are like number wise, but so that is one option. With regards to these capital projects, if council were to decide, say on Lagoon, that we actually wanted to protect them, then we would actually pour an actual curb type piece. So that has different types of, do you have a picture? So that's what you're doing in Sandwich now.
Yeah.
That helps. That's just a conversion to a buffered bike lane. It certainly makes the cyclist feel safe. Any kind of wandering type car will be pushed back into the traffic. Any kind of detrimental change, say a a quick veer to the right is just going to pop that curb and hit the cyclist anyways. But day-to-day driving, and certainly from a comfort level for helping with mode shift, that's probably a great way to go for in-place situations. If we're going to do it on a capital project, we would not do this. We would actually pour an island-like curb, so it would be 2 feet across, 600 millimeters across, and then come down and be 6 inches high. So it'd be a little more substantial from a curb, and it's likely cheaper because it'll be poured in place. It'll be done with a machine. And you can see that. I think a good example of that might be on Government down by the Mercedes dealership. There's some ones that they did there that they actually poured those in place. So that would be the kind of treatment we do on a capital program if we decided to do that on some of our streets as we go. So Lagoon would be a great opportunity to look at doing it there.
So do we pick up some wood by doing that too?
Not really. It's going to fit within that same 700. You might pick up 100 mils. I mean, there's no standard with regards to what your protection looks like. Some communities, if you've been to Vancouver, have planter boxes. Those get a lot wider, but they're basically taking a lane of traffic to do that. So if you want to take a lane of traffic, then you have some abilities to, widen some things out. You could do a specialized formed curb, like a small little wall, and make it 300 mils high and only 4 inches wide, 100 mils wide. So you could do something like that if you wanted to. That would be pretty detrimental to a vehicle though. I mean, it's one thing to rub your wheel up against a 6-inch curb. It's another thing to take your vehicle up against a 300 mil wall, but certainly that would slow people down. That would make them uncomfortable. So I haven't seen it anywhere, but it's not within the realm of possibilities that we could try it somewhere.
Probably not a good idea with my wife driving, so. Oh, sure, I hope she's not watching tonight. Councillor Day.
I'll just have to write that down in my little black book. I think this is really important to get this right. And I really think it's important to make it safe for cyclists. We've been working for years to make it safe for drivers at intersections. I've seen things change to a different way and back to the original way numerous times in different parts of the city. But if you go back to your picture of Kelly Road, I just want to make the point, that Kelly Road is a really important transportation corridor for 2 reasons. One, it's flat. So that is going to encourage a lot more active transportation. And 2, it's very closely connected to the Galloping Goose Trail. So it's an area where cyclists can utilize and find other connections to other areas. So it's a good place to have our best foot forward in regards to it being commuter bicycle friendly. But it's also a really important connection as I travel throughout Colwood almost daily, certainly weekly throughout all of it. And as I notice the traffic patterns changing as development occurs, a lot of our connections are getting very full with a high degree of traffic. And we know that traffic always is like water. It finds the path of least resistance. So which means that Kelly Road is going to get busier faster than maybe other roads may get because of traffic conditions and other communities developing at high rates of speed. Specifically, I'm talking about Veterans Memorial Parkway and the fact that it's rapidly becoming difficult to cross the intersection of Sooke Road at VMP because there's so much traffic at peak hours that it's taking you a couple of lights to get through sometimes. And Kelly Road, it has an extraordinarily long turning lane leading onto it. It connects both cyclists and commuters very well. And it also has a very important transit corridor. So there's 2 other uses that we don't talk about in our transportation master plan that I just think we should keep in mind. One is loading zone parking. where we have, you know, big vehicles like a big van, furniture company, moving company, will be looking for some place to be able to park, to access either bringing new furniture or taking someone's belongings for a move, which is certainly becoming more and more problematic in our neighboring municipalities. And we also have a desire for parking for accessing, visiting a neighborhood type area. I realize that we don't accommodate parking on the road, but there are some traditional uses in these areas, and it's really important. And when we're making our access points to the Galloping Goose Trail, it's an area where there's a lot of debris that accumulates. I don't know why it is, but it was a nefarious spot. 2 of my children regularly commuted through that area by bicycle. And I used to joke about how often flats had to be repaired as a result of driving through there. So it's really important that whatever we put in to facilitate that cycling is able to be maintained so that that's not a big issue going forward. And my very last point is for Kelly Road. It has a significant forest canopy on that road that makes that neighborhood special. It's had different people in favor and opposed to the trees that are in Herm Williams Park over the years. We've had, you know, challenges to our tree retention in the area numerous times. And it is a unique character that I think is special in Colwood. So I really think that we need to get that right to accommodate all the uses, but also retain our character. And I just also wanted to mention that only just next week, we're going to be having our first active transportation committee meeting. So we want to leave room to hear from our citizens as to what they think is critical in that area. But it's a really important corridor because it's flat, because it connects major commercial areas, including Colwood.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Councillor Olsen.
I'll be brief. I just wanted to just to speak about Kelly Road is also just that this is there's also a large stretch of Kelly Road that is 30-kilometer because there is a park there. So I think this is definitely an important road to focus on as far as having the protected bike lanes. It is getting busier and busier, and we have kids moving through there. There's a daycare facility right across the street. So this is definitely, I just wanted to point that out because it wasn't mentioned, but you know, that there is a 30-kilometer zone through there. So I would like to see us put some extra thought into Kelly Road for sure with the protected lanes. Thank you.
Please continue, Josh.
Thank you for all of your comments. Okay, so I'll move forward and I will get into more of the detail on Kelly Road specifically after Hagel, so we can certainly discuss it further. So starting with Hagel, to get into more of the details. So firstly, for Hagel Road, now the full designs are appended to the report, but these are some of the snippets taken from the designs, just so we can all look at the same thing. The side of the street for the sidewalk was chosen so that it connects to David Cameron School. We didn't want any mid-block crossings that's just another risk for pedestrians, and to ultimately connect to the Goose that's across the street and through the cemetery there. When looking at this specific cross section, you can see a couple of the issues that we've encountered. On the site, you can see there's a tree and a hydrant right there, and the tree is substantial. You can see the shadow of it falling across the street. And if I go to the next slide,
this is the view from the road. And you can see the green layout is the approximate location of where the sidewalk is. And again, this is right now shown at the back of curb. It gives us that tie-in as well. That hydrant would need to be relocated, but the hope in this case was that the tree could potentially be saved. Even being this close to the tree, we would have an arborist come and assess. And we really go by whatever he says to be able to save it. But there's still there's a real possibility that we might have to lose that tree in order to realize even this. Had the sidewalk be placed at the property line, which is about where that fence is, there's no option to save the tree in that case. Furthermore, as you see at the further away from the picture, you can see the tie-in point of a property line sidewalk has to contend with the hydro pole. And that's one of the issues that we encounter again and again are those with the placement of existing utilities, be it hydro poles, hydrants, and other in-ground valves and what have you. So a lot of that plays into the ultimate decision of where we're suggesting and designing these sidewalks. Next spot is, so further north on Hagel, actually this now demonstrates that the road actually shifts within our current right of way. So suddenly our road is actually closer to the, which side is that? West side of the road, and our sidewalk to maintain the same alignment is now right at the back of property line. We have to squeeze it in there, and it's in situations like this where we start seeing that's approximately where the sidewalk might end up. Well, that ditch will need to be infilled, and there's likely to be some small retaining walls because of those grade changes as we bring the sidewalk through there. All those are similar to the same the design issues that I discussed earlier on. Finally, one of the other issues with Hagel Road was this whole corridor itself. Ultimately, we are suggesting to wrap the sidewalk. It's actually city-owned property, thankfully. So we're suggesting to wrap the sidewalk off the boulevard and onto the city-owned property to avoid hydro pole and an existing tree. So we can avoid the costs of moving a hydro pole and save a tree on the road. You can see the south side, or like whatever side that is, the east side of the road actually has the property line there. So shifting the road itself over was not a real solution without having to take property. And the grain on that side would also require another substantial retaining wall. This is a view of the road itself and a poorly drawn sidewalk. You can see it. You can see that's essentially what we're suggesting is to wrap the sidewalk around the back to be able to save that tree, avoid relocating the pole, and still tie into the crosswalk and that existing David Cameron School sidewalk right there. Those are my quick highlights of Hagel. If anyone has questions on Hagel Road, happy to take those before going on to Kelly. Oh, okay.
Councillor Day.
Just back to the sidewalk on that corner by the school. What was accomplished at Royal Bay Secondary, this might be a location where that concept of having the bike lane and the sidewalk kind of all together, one larger pathway, of course avoiding your hydro line as well, but that would kind of direct your larger number, hopefully, of students walking or riding to school, utilizing that area. Might be better with those kinds of treatments. Something maybe to chat with the active transportation group about the best way to handle that. I like your way of looking at it, trying to save the tree. And, you know, I'm totally fine with going around obstacles like hydro poles. We want to save as much money as possible on each project so that we can do more projects and get more of Colwood connected and active, especially around schools. So I just think that's great that you're seeing those things and working around them, and maybe could look to some of our other examples that have been quite successful.
Thank you. And to that point, every time I say something needs to be relocated, like a hydro pole or a hydrant, I mean, that to me, that's that's dollars on the end of the project that if we can avoid by aligning the sidewalk here or there. Retaining walls is the same issue. They all come with some quite high cost points that we need to consider. So moving on to Kelly. So this cross section of Kelly, as we've discussed before, sort of shows the alignment. This is a bit of a snapshot. Now, something important to note is that the stretch of Kelly we're talking about is really only between Machosen Road. So the Machosen Road that continues north to Adai 80 and extends to the, we don't even go as far as Sooke Road because there's that complex there with an existing sidewalk. So we're going to tie into that existing sidewalk. So the stretch of road we're talking about for this, the intent is that it ties Sooke into 80 so that people can connect to the Goose. That's the intent of the sidewalk. That's the stretch we're talking about for Kelly at this stage. Ultimately, of course, we'd like to do the full strength stretch of Kelly, but at this stage of the process and the scope of work, that's what we're talking about. Now, the problem, pardon me, please.
Sorry, I just know the area quite well, but I can't place myself on your map. But closer to Sooke Road on Kelly, on the, I don't know what direction I am right now, but closer towards Colwood Corners on Kelly Road, that side of the road, there are transit stops. And those transit stops for accessibility need to have access points that are at least paved, if not a sidewalk. So I think that needs to be factored into your equations. I know you're trying to keep to one side of the road for a straight shot of a pathway, but where we have transit stops, we need some treatments to address those accessibility issues because if you want to go that way on Kelly Road, you have to get on the other side of the road from the sidewalk.
Absolutely. And we can certainly look into that and look and see if there's room in our budget for that type of work. But that's a good example of where scope creep starts happening, because when we start going down one side of the road, we look at the bus stops of the other. And when you start looking at the bus stops and the other, you can actually tie into the corner of the road just by going a little further. And if you tie into the corner of the road, then you can actually go a little further and get that. And it really becomes a domino effect. So if there's low hanging fruit that's doable and affordable, then certainly. But perhaps upgrading our transit stops could be included in another project that we do in town. And we can pick and choose the most important ones and address that way.
So that would tie into our accessibility plan that the new act is also requiring. So I do know about those stops because members of IACTI have been working to identify, especially the ones where we know there are people with sight impairments who need to use those stops. And some of the buses that travel on Kelly Road that are going to other destinations only pick up passengers on the one side of the road. For example, there's I can't think of what the number is, but the express bus actually goes down Kelly Road and it goes to the university. So it's the only place on Kelly Road where you can pick up a bus that's going to take you to the other exchanges in Langford. So that other side of the road may be very important for transit connections.
Yes, thank you. So one of the reasons that this side of the road was also selected was that because of the existing facilities on the other side, there is a protected sidewalk. It's just an asphalt sidewalk with a curb protection. It's right on the road. It's not perfect, But there is something there. Currently, there's really nothing on this side, and this does tie into a bus stop that's on the corner of Machosen and Kelly. You're of course not wrong. We could have easily picked the other side as well, but in the balancing of benefits, we went with this for now. But more to the point, so this demonstrates the jump in some of the property lines. You can see on the left side, the sidewalks almost right at the property line to try to fit everything in. And then the property line jumps back. Now, there was an option where we could curve the sidewalk away from the road to meet the property line on the right side of the drawing. But again, we had other utilities, and in this case, trees in the way. So this is the bus stop that I was talking about and that we would like to tie in. This might be an option where we look at shrinking the sidewalk to 1.5 meters instead of the 2 that we're designing to get around that existing hydro pole. Or in fact, maybe even pave around the hydro pole. It's not the best option to have a hydro pole on the sidewalk, of course, but if someone can get around the back at 1.5 meters and someone can walk around the front at 0.75, it's a travelable path, and we only have so much boulevard. But that's just one of the issues in designing. This is the part where the property line jumps back suddenly, and you can see here, these are some of the trees that Councillor Day had mentioned that are on Fulton, established fairly large trees. So while we'd love to come again back to property line, that would mean removing not just this one, but I think there's 2 or 3 others that would be right in the path of the sidewalk at property line. But we're not without issues having the sidewalk where the green marks are shown there. You can see there's still a hydrant and yet another hydro pole through Kelly Road. So things get quite busy. There's a lot of existing utilities, not to mention the driveways and other personal property that people have in the right of way that we always have to deal with. And then finally, this is the intersection with Machosen Road. To this point, because someone had mentioned previous about if we ever want to extend sidewalk down Machosen Road or Adai, where would that sidewalk go and how would that tie in? Well, however we decide to do it in the future, this is just creating a path for a pedestrian to be able to cross the road. We need to bring the sidewalk all the way to the asphalt so that they can get there without stepping in a ditch, cross the road, and then exit on the other side. So however we want to tie in a future sidewalk, whether that's at the road or at property line, that can be done, and it would be done by either removing a couple of stamp panels of sidewalk or bending a sidewalk back to property. It wouldn't be detrimental to what we're building today.
Beatty Road is also where you identified the bike path going to the Galloping Goose Trail. So this is also a cycle route where we've facilitated cyclists to be able to cross at Sooke and Machosen. At the light there, we've got the barriers so cars can't go, but bicycles can. So they are coming across Sooke Road there, coming kind of down the little hill and into this area, and they're coming to this intersection where on the same corner where you've got Machosen Road labeled there. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be a path for the cyclists to cross Kelly Road here on the right-hand side. So you actually maybe need all 4 sidewalk markings, zebra markings. I don't know what kind of markings you would put for your cycle path crossing there, but I have been seeing more and more cyclists using this since the improvements have occurred at Machosen at Sooke. So just that's kind of an area where it's kind of inconvenient. Here's the cyclist, he's got his great new route picked out. He's heading to the Galloping Goose Trail, crossing the road, except that in order to activate the signal, he's got to cross Machosen Road to the wrong side of the road for him, hit the button to get the orange lights to flash, cross the road, you know, wait for traffic. And it does, I've seen a number of conflicts in this intersection related to cyclists and vehicles.
Excellent. Great comment. Thank you. So yeah, to that point, and a quick note on the Machosen 80 road. The intent is for this project is to update some of the road painting and signage. So that's the scope of work for those two roads. It's much simpler than the rest of the sidewalks and bike lanes that we're talking about. FYI. Now Lagoon. So here you can see some of the property line around that specific corner. The north end, this is the north end of the road, and it requires a sidewalk at the back or curb to squeak around that tight corner. It notes property acquisition potential, but obviously we would avoid that and shrink the sidewalk or find or potentially curve, solve that some other way. There's a number of other issues on Lagoon that we might encounter. Grading, utility relocating, retaining walls, and all the tie-ins would be less expensive if they're at the back of curb rather than property line because of the grading and existing utilities on Lagoon. Some of those examples are this, for instance. So the bike lane will be approximately where that asphalt sidewalk is currently, which means the sidewalk at back of curb will be right beside it in that bend before the steep hill. If we wanted to put the sidewalks at property line, you're talking about right at the top of the hill where you can kind of see that fence. And the sidewalk would have to be much lower down. So you're talking about a couple meters of retaining wall, which says more money. There's a hydro pole at the top of that road, which also says more money. So those are some of the issues that we're encountering down Lagoon.
I just wanted to suggest consideration, especially in a location like this. In a number of locations in Saanich, they have raised the bike lane up taller and put it adjacent to the sidewalk. So they have an elevated space with a sidewalk and the bike lane right beside it, which would be probably more comfortable for bikes in that location, as well as for pedestrians, because you would have that additional width available to you, much like in front of Belmont Senior Secondary, not Belmont, Royal Bay Senior Secondary, where we have, the bike lane and the cycle path right beside. So I'm just trying to think of if I can tell you the name of the road in Saanich. There's one on Cook Street at Quadra that's raised above. It's along Cook Street, and there's another on the road where the intersection on the Pat Bay Highway goes to Beaver and Elk Lake that goes up the hill, not Sayward, the one before. It's used by all the kids going to school there.
I can certainly look into that.
Anyways, the same sort of issue, a steep hill and a raised cycle lane is on the right-hand side and the sidewalk is on the left-hand side of the road there. So because they have a lot of kids going to Claremont there, up and down that hill. So the walkers are on the sidewalk and the cyclists are on the raised, it's a paved sidewalk on the right-hand side of that hill.
Gotcha.
Just options.
Absolutely. Thank you. One of the other, this one demonstrates some of the trees that will need to be cut back as well. Again, the bike lane will be about where this asphalt sidewalk is existing, which means the sidewalk is either right beside it and we'll be able to trim some trees, or again, at the property line, we're losing all of those trees. FYI. Here's another grade issue. Again, the bike lane might be where that gravel shoulder is, and the sidewalk is probably midline of that ditch. all of the ditching on Lagoon also has to be undergrounded because the new sidewalks are going in there. So that's another large cost item on the project. If this lot sidewalk in this picture was located at property line, you're talking about probably just the crest of that hill, which means another retaining wall. So again, quite a number of retaining walls. Those we're hoping to wrap the sidewalk around those utilities to avoid their relocation. This too is another retaining wall issue. If we were to try to locate it at property line, the hydro pole that's just hidden behind the tree there is probably about where the property line is located, and the sidewalk would plow right in front of that, and so the grading on that hill becomes an issue, and all those trees are also lost. Alternatively, the sidewalk at back of curb would be about mid ditch, which makes grading a little simpler, and we might be able to save some of those trees, although they'll likely be cut back quite a bit as well. This one,
Sorry, Josh.
oh, pardon me.
Question for you, and maybe I missed it along the way here, but we were talking about Lagoon Road. Now I know there's an existing sidewalk section that was put in there as part of a project, and you're going to get to that. But considering the cost, you know, on that side, well, the side we're talking about with retaining walls and all the rest, you know, is it prohibitive to go on the other side because of the grade, because we don't have as many power poles there, for example? Like, where's the balance there?
That's a really, really good question. So Lagoon as well, we went through this balance of what makes the best choice for where to put the sidewalk. The grade on the other side is, and next to those undeveloped lands, is substantial. We would need to widen that, like that shoulder, which means we're widening into that steep slope, which means substantial retaining walls along a massive portion of where we're talking. The other, so fingers crossed, you know, in the future, if and when those lands are developed, I know it's a bit of a sensitive because of their wetlands and such, but should those be developed, we would be asking for frontage improvements, and thus it would be then on the developers to put those substantial retaining walls in and take that off the shoulders of the city.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I had a feeling it was grade related, and yeah, it's a pretty rough drop there. So just to, while we're on the subject of the road here, so are we talking here as a collector that / arterial, the 3.3 lane width with this?
This is, well, at this point, yes, this is identified as a collector and would be a 3.3 with a 0.7 buffer or protected, and then 0.1, 0.8.
Because it's a subject of mine that I'm interested in. Aside from roundabouts, curb plunking is also a big thing of mine. And I liked what Councillor Day suggested, but also we're looking to retain space. I just wanted to correct something. I looked into it. I have some material on it, and the curb that Saanich is rolling out, they actually have a machine that they put out, in fact, is only 255 millimeters in width. So we have a 700 millimeter painted buffer. So we're actually, you know, we're looking at saving over 400 millimeters. And that's why I asked the question at the outset, would we gain some width back? Because I had to research it again to make sure I had the math right, but there actually is a substantial savings. And, you know, we can argue the effectiveness, but there's a great photo on Twitter right now of a car high centered on it that, you know, it didn't get over it. It certainly prevented it from hitting somebody. So anyway, I don't want to beat that one to death, but I just thought, you know, the existing technology that Saanich is deploying would gain us, you know, a fair amount of space versus even the painted buffer, which, as we know, really is just an optical thing. But anyway, don't mean to hijack you. Just want to throw that out there.
Not at all. Great point. And yes, we could certainly look into I guess a thinner protection zone, but it's, you know, raised. So that would accomplish the same feat. One of the, I guess, considerations probably with the master plan and the 3.3 lanes is even on roads like Lagoon, is that traffic calming aspect of the narrowed lanes. People slow down when they're tightened. So one of the thoughts. Yeah, so I jumped forward a little bit, but I think I'm making my point too many times here. This is where, in this case, grading isn't an issue, but the existing hydro poles are. They're basically at property line, and you can see where a property line sidewalk would run through every hydro pole on this side of the road, and we'd like to avoid that by putting it at back of curb. But I belabor the point. To address your comment from earlier, there is a small section of sidewalk that a developer had put as part of their frontage works. One of the reasons we want to the side is to pick this up and tie it into our, transportation network. To this point, obviously the developer was able to put the sidewalk right at that property line because he's a developer, so we can hold them and tell them to do whatever we want, and we don't care about the price. Obviously, they had to put in that retaining wall here. And it works. This ultimately, they didn't put the underground storm, but this might be a good example of why cash in lieu can work for when you're dealing with a developer. What they do 10 years ago doesn't work what we're doing 10 years from now. So it can make things simpler. You can also see another, I'm sorry, Mr. Councillor James.
I didn't want to interrupt your stream of consciousness. Thank you, Josh. I like all this stuff here. And I mean, I like the fact that the feel I'm getting here is, or at least something, a note I made to myself is that really the one size fits all cross section is aspirational in nature, but it certainly doesn't work in certain locations. This, I think, is a challenging strip. So hats off to you guys. I can't offer too much input with my arts degree, but is this a location where we might consider one chunk of multi-use pathway and avoid moving some of those utilities and building the 2 or 3 meter high retaining walls at the top of the road? I mean, where you're compressed road section wise, I would prefer, it would be great if we could get away with sort of one pathway that accommodates all of our needs in that compressed stretch coming around the corner. And perhaps it widens out and we get to what we're trying to achieve on the lower portions, like getting close to this. Your thoughts on that? I mean, I would love to see us not paint ourselves into a corner where we're having to move utilities because of our cross section, and God forbid if we move the sidewalk left or right, half a meter, for goodness sakes, right? Am I picking that? That up?
So it, depending on, of course, it's something we would evaluate. If there's a situation where a multi-use path or a raised sidewalk and bike lane would work, then absolutely. Most of our cross sections, if I look at anything, with the sidewalk right next to the bike lane, it's space wise, you're losing the width of the curb as opposed to a multi-use path, but it's essentially the same thing when you have it at back of curb, because you have the bike lane on road, small curb, sidewalk. So that width, the difference in width is.
I hate to see us blow the budget on one stretch here because we've got to build a 5 meter retaining wall.
Well, that's what I'm essentially trying to demonstrate is that I really agree that, at property line is ideal,
yes.
But in this case, and we'll talk about Fulton as well, that there might be a section of Fulton where property line can make sense, but a lot of it is, we're really constrained by not just the right of way, but the grading and the implications of building.
And when this goes out to a vendor, I take it, they come back with options based on our request, or are we providing the engineering for?
Yes, well, we're got a consultant, McElhaney bidded, and are the consultants on the design side of this. So once the design is completed by McElhaney, we'll then tender this, and the contractor will bid what we design. Okay, that makes sense. And a good contractor hopefully will suggest.
Thanks. It's a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward, existing sidewalk, Fulton Road. So we're nearing the end here. Fulton Road. So again, west or east side of the road was the first consideration. And again, it was a balance of pros and cons. So ultimately, it was the west side that was chosen. Now, it was seen as easier to build on, although it can be argued that the sections of the east side are easier in some cases. The grading on the east side, as you can see in this picture, the contour lines on the bottom side of the road there denote a much steeper side. So all of the driveways, not all of the driveways, most of the driveways on Fulton are at this steeper angle, and those tie-ins become an issue. That was one of the reasons the east side. There's also an opportunity to tie into existing sidewalks on Fulton, and I'll discuss that in a second, but that could also save costs depending on how we want to deal with those old standard of sidewalks. And also this is where the bike lane can be on the uphill side of the road, which assists bikes trying to climb Fulton Road at a much slower. A bike that might be going downhill could keep up with traffic and stay safer just because they're going at a similar speed. There's also one of the other reasons for this side of the road is that there's a development potential near Sooke Road that we would hope to see those frontage improvements if and when it's developed in the future. Here's a good example of the constraints on Fulton. On this side, the side that the picture is taken from is where the sidewalk is proposed. But in order to realize that, it means that we need room for the bike lane, which is probably where the sidewalk is on this gravel sidewalk is currently, which means we need to relocate this retaining wall back. And there's only so much room before the property line. The alternative is the other side of the road, and you can see a solid massive rock that is preventing that option as well. And again, it's a little bit of half dozen one, and blasting is very expensive, and so we're hopeful that we can make a change in the design of the retaining wall work in this specific case. This photo. This photo is actually the section where
Councillor Kay and then Councillor Ward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, you're on.
Oh, I am on. There we go. Just if you go back to your picture, I'm just wondering if it's possible to, I'm not really entirely following whether this is where the existing pathway is shown on the photo. Is that on the side that you want the sidewalk on?
Yes.
Okay. Because if the other side of the road where the big rock is needed more room, could the road bend a little bit there is my question.
Yes, so that might be part of our ultimate design of at least in this little section here is to relocate the center line of the road to buy us a little bit more room.
Yeah, exactly.
But that would also require blasting on that side to realize the shoulder of the road further into that rock wall. We're literally in between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I do think that in cases where there is an existing rocky outcrop that is, preventing us from our best alignment for a proper functioning cycle lane on both sides of the road and at least a sidewalk on one side of the road, we need to consider biting the bullet. I think blasting is less expensive than it used to be, at least based on the amount of blasting that developers do. It must be, but I don't have any knowledge in that area myself. So I'm sure that where we can curve, bend, wiggle, whatever we have to do, that doesn't make it impossible to do. And maybe we just slow things down a little, take it in small stages or whatever we need to do to accomplish that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Josh, quick question for you. Like Fulton Road is a pretty long road and pretty steep in sections. Does this plan call for this to happen from Sooke Road all the way to sort of where it terminates near Havenwood, or is this just a portion of it, or?
Yeah, so this, no, it goes to essentially Bexhill. It's confusing because Bexhill continues almost straight off the top of Fulton.
Okay.
But the intent is that this project terminates about there.
Okay, no, and that's fair, I guess. And here's where maybe I show my my ignorance of the whole plan, but I mean, obviously the gold standard of the sidewalks that we see in Royal Bay and that we see happening right now, you know, and that's kind of what you'd like to see is concrete, decent width, you know, nice design, all the rest of it. But in my mind, there is a degree of flexibility. I think we can't fit everything everywhere. And I look at Fulton and some other roads on Triangle Mountain, and I think they're extremely steep. They're large lots, fairly spaced out. You know, I don't, having walked to that area, at least during the election, not a lot of pedestrian traffic. And I understand, I'm not saying people don't use it, and there isn't some validity to obviously improving it and looking at safe means for people to cycle and access it. But I go back to what Councillor Day was talking about, where you have, you know, outside Royal Bay Secondary, for example, the sidewalk and the pavement section. But I'd go a step further and think, could you maybe just design a multi-use pathway up there versus a traditional sidewalk, and use asphalt instead of concrete, for example? You know, we're counting our pennies in Colwood anyway. So instead of the same design concept applied everywhere, look at particular neighborhoods and say, okay, could we do something different, something unique that might stretch our money further, run this thing the whole way up, but have it sort of a multi-purpose. Yeah, it's a little bit wider. Maybe you delineate pedestrian side from the multi-use section, which is for, you know, accessible use, bike use, everything else. And I could be completely off my rocker here, but I just think it would stretch a lot further. And I wonder if there's any merit in that in a low traffic area.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. We're operating, so at the beginning of the active transportation project, these were identified and we had preliminary designs, and staff came to the previous council to ask for direction on what level of design. And we were given the direction to proceed with the concrete sidewalks, curb, bike lane, the highest standards. So that's what we're continuing on from previous direction. We can always pivot if necessary.
Hi there, just the determination to go with the concrete sidewalks was based on the longevity of the concrete sidewalk versus the longevity of the paved sidewalks. So when you compare those out over time, the cost, there is no cost savings because you have to fix the other ones. It was a cost saving measure that was undertaken many years ago in Colwood, even before I was on council, that we got our paved sidewalks, and they lasted pretty darn good considering all the number of times they've been driven over and smashed into and snow plowed, and not that they do it regularly, they're very good. But it's trying to build something to last is the legacy that I hope we're trying to leave.
Councillor Ward. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I appreciate that, Councillor Day. That's relevant. I think on the same subject, I guess then I would amend it to say, okay, if you're doing concrete, does it need to be, you know, the same width and things? Like, again, I'm looking at it thinking, what are the odds of two mobility scooters passing each other on Fulton versus, you know, Kelly Road or elsewhere? And believe me, I'm a strong advocate for accessibility. And I think where we have it, you know, where we have sidewalks in much more trafficked areas of the community, I prefer the better design. But I wonder, could you go down to what's still an accessibility standard of, I think it's 1.3 versus the 2 or whatever we have planned here. And I'm really just looking to see, okay, are there opportunities to stretch our money a bit further? I love these big wide sidewalks and I can appreciate where the last council came from, but it's not all flat land, and I just wonder, are we pouring money under the ground there that could extend it further or go elsewhere? So rhetorical question, probably I'll leave it out there for the moment.
My question was similar, actually. It's what's going to take to, what type of effort is it on staff? You know, I know what the previous council had decided. I was part of that decision, and we certainly didn't want to treat the people up in, you know, some of the thinking in Triangle Mountain as, you know, second-class citizens, that's for sure. We wanted the same treatment. That was part of the philosophy in actual fact, but a good point is still made right now. You know, what if it is more effective, more efficient? Because, and maybe people don't walk it right now. I do see more pedestrians. I see a few bikes zipping down the hill, but just walking around election time, I didn't see a lot of pedestrians, and I don't blame them because it's scary walking along there. But what kind of effort would it be to actually look at that option, you know, making it a multi-use pathway, you know, instead of, is there savings? Is there significant savings in doing that? I'm just looking at it from a practical point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So we'd talk to our consultants to have them sort of mock up that alternative design and give a cost estimate to it. It would probably be a change of, you know, a couple grand, you know, maybe $5,000 from the consultant to look into those, maybe less than that, to look into that alternative design.
Would you just a wag, a swag, whatever you want to call it?
Do it myself?
Yeah. What would the cost difference be between going multi-use or going separate sidewalks and separate bike paths? What kind of differential is it?
Great question. And I would have to come back to council. The current cost estimate for Fulton is $2.1 million.
Okay.
So with a multi-use path, you know, I'm trying to think of, I'll talk you through the thought process. And John probably has some great thoughts he'd love to share. So.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we can get ourselves into a, you know, we could maybe save a couple $100,000 if there's a retaining wall there that can be eliminated. That's 20 feet high, 50 meters long. We could save significant amounts of money. But we may be talking about tens of thousands on a $2 million project. So I don't think we want to compromise what we're trying to achieve. But that being said, what I'm hearing tonight is that if we can think of an out-of-box solution that meets the philosophy of providing proper routes, but can save us some significant dollars that we can spend somewhere else, that staff should feel empowered to take a look at those paths. And if that's what you're asking, then yes, we can do that for sure. But to say, oh no, we can save this much, we can't tell you that. But what we can know is that what I'm hearing is think out of the box, work on the philosophy of we still want to protect them. We still want to provide the amenities for accessibility and different issues. But if we can save significant dollars, then feel empowered to make that choice. That we've heard. And if that's the direction where I'm correct in that hearing, then that's something we can move forward with our consultant. And yes, that would be thousands of dollars. I tell developers all the time, we change your plans for thousands of dollars, or we can change your construction for tens of thousands of dollars. Better off to do it on paper before you do it out in the real world. So that's the time to do it is now. So we may come back to you and say, hey, we went over budget a little bit on a design program, but then we'll come back and hopefully save some dollars in the construction program. So that's something we can look at for sure.
Okay, thanks, John.
I just wanted, I forgot to say one thing, and that was that Fulton Road is also the only route for a lot of kids going to school. There are some shortcuts, but and there are some only a few really diehard kids who walked it every day, but I know them. And they're the better for having done it. But also that I know we're deeply getting into the weeds here tonight, but I think it's important. It's an important discussion for this council to understand. So I really appreciate that you're taking the time to do this and be open with all of the crazy things that we could imagine doing. But also when we're considering costs and considering safe routes to school, make sure we share that with our active transportation members, because I really, really want them to be empowered to give us really excellent feedback.
Absolutely. Great. Go ahead, please.
Okay, coming in the home stretch here, this is the nearing the bottom of Fulton where the existing sidewalk is. Right now in the designs, we have shown new sidewalk taking place to the old stuff. But this is what's existing. This is a 1.5 meter sidewalk which exists, and it might be a great opportunity to tie into the existing sidewalk, not replace it, to come up to new standards. We might need to relocate the curb to realize the bike lane and such. On top of that, this is a stretch that we're hoping to pair with a storm drain replacement because the storm drain is needs replacing. But again, hopefully we get some synergies with that, the pairing of the projects through this section here. Please notice all the hydro lines on the other side of the road as well. Finally, this is just demonstrating this asphalt is existing. Likely the bike lane will end up somewhere mid curb line there, depending on exactly how wide the road is there. The property line, you can actually see a property pin. It's a white little mark near the right of the photo. Again, if we try to fit it on property line, we're coming through a lot of people's front lawns and a lot of existing foliage and trees and so on. Finally, this is the section where I would say we could probably fit a sidewalk at property line. This is the section on Sooke Road, just the bottom of Fulton. And the grades level out here and the frontage of people's properties are set back to property line. This would be a great opportunity to throw the bike lane in, put in a little boulevard and put the sidewalk at the property line. And you can see we, in this case, avoid the hydro line that would end up in that middle boulevard area. And so although it's not shown on the drawings right now, that's our intent to update the drawings. Looking south from the same, so there's Sooke Road and there's the intersection. We'd probably at least cut back, if not lose a couple trees to realize that. But in this case, to be able to get that sidewalk at the back of property line and realize that that through this short stretch, it might be a worthwhile trade-off. I think that is all the slides I have. Yes, it is. And if we have any questions and I apologize for the length, I didn't realize it would
That's
draw out.
great presentation, Josh. Really appreciate it. It gets us all on the same playing field. So I really do appreciate it. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm just gonna take a 3-minute break, just a health break, and get back here and we'll finish this off. 3 minutes. So everyone be back at 9:03, please. Item 7.5, Ian Bourhill, are you doing a presentation at all, Ian? This is on the South Island Prosperity Partnership
Thank you, Your
membership.
Worship. Yeah, I'll keep this short and sweet, considering council got a presentation already on this side. So thank you, Your Worship. As you're aware, the city has an opportunity to reflect upon its participation in the South Island Prosperity Partnership before entering into another funding agreement. As was presented to council on March 27th, SIP offers regional economic development services through a collaborative model of governance and decision-making involving over 70 other local governments, First Nations, and private companies. The current membership agreement ended on March 31st of this year, and continuation of participation would cost the city approximately $35,000 a year. And SIP is proposing a three-year funding agreement that would cost a total of just over $107,000. Administration is requesting that council provide direction on potential continuation of the city's membership in SIP. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and happy to address any questions you may have.
Thanks very much, Ian. So I was going to get our SIP rep to say a few words, and I will do secondary words without being biased. So I'm letting you off the hook a little bit, David, just to help you out.
I'll do primary biased words then. Thank you. I have attended a few meetings with this organization, I have to say, for two reasons. I feel a bit unsure of, I don't have any really clear pathway to an answer here, or even comments, in a way. One is the grand scope of their, I guess, their mandate, and certainly from what I heard for their discussions, they're very, in my view, very regional oriented, if not even a bit downtown centric. Meaning Victoria Saanich, the bigger population base, for whatever that means. Then the other is my own business experience, and my life was very much neighborhood, very small, very focused. And in the last 10 years, we owned our business. It was very much Colwood focused, meaning that anything beyond a really small radius, we just didn't deal with it. And there's a lot of potential right there. We have then in City Hall a lot of talent, a lot of capability, a lot of skill set, a lot of like-mindedness that I think could go a long way toward helping us develop economic readiness. I have a list here from our little exercise back March 22nd in the strategic planning session. And under that heading, the number of items here is 24, 25 items. Every single one of them speaks to economic prosperity, in my opinion. You can take a small shop or small business, a small garage, a small artisan shop, a small educational enterprise, and you can start to multiply that. The job creation is great. And indeed, most studies I've come across, they talk about small business generating more job potential than large enterprises, which have a tendency to move in, build, and maybe fail, maybe not promise or deliver on the promise. So I have a bit of an issue with this organization in terms of the scope of their view. I've spoken to them about it, and they're very amenable to that idea. I just don't see the deliverable. I think $35,000 a year spent in Colwood, saved is one option, but spent in Colwood on our, we have our own committee working on these issues, and perhaps, I don't know, you wouldn't call them trade fairs, but almost open town halls. The ideas fair at Royal Roads, but down at the Gateway site, find a piece of land, maybe set up some tents, make it a nice day, and draw the community in and show them pictures. I mean, the things that I've seen coming to this table through presentations, a lot of it is very exciting. And to me, I don't know where that type of input comes from this organization thing. I don't want to be too critical, believe me, because I am new to this group and I've only been able to, experience a certain amount of it, and they have a lot to bring, I'm sure, on a certain level. I just don't see it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. So unfairly, I put David into this situation and he's only had the opportunity to sit for the past few months. I just wanted to get his first impressions. I previously served as the member for the city of Colwood for 3 years before I just went, that's enough for me. And then the mayor, the then mayor took over the last year. So, and I'm going to give you the pluses about it. The pluses about it are that we're participating as one of the 11 member municipalities. It's not all municipalities have joined this. And I know that there's certainly discussion amongst some other municipalities whether they're getting full value out of it right now. But obviously, I'm using their words again too, that 80% of our people actually work in the city or in Greater Victoria, and therefore somehow this benefits them. So that's that indirect connection, I believe. They're the clear advantages that I do see of it right now. And, you know, it's that networking too, I suppose. But now, so for some of the cons on it right now, the municipalities are the major funders of SIP. And they use that money, of course, to leverage more money for projects. So it's really good for them, but a lot of the projects aren't even related to us, and we don't get the benefit of them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And even when they had this original project 5 years ago, when I was the first member of SIP for the city of Colwood, they actually applied for a project that they had no chance of even winning because we weren't a bilingual city. In fact, there was no funding. None of this government funding even went east of the or west of the Ontario border, and yet they spent all the resources on that. The governance, biggest issue that I have on it is the governance of this. We all sit as, and it's called a municipal partners board. So we have mayors and councillor reps that sit on this municipal partners board. And it doesn't give direction, because the board of directors does the direction, yet we're the major funders. It's just an odd governance model. And I've always had problems with that. I've talked to them about that. Yep, we're going to change, but nothing's changed in all this time. So, you know, I basically asked to be removed from it because there's no sense having someone on representing the city that didn't have his heart in it. And I saw what happened during COVID-19, right after COVID-19, and the city under Ian's leadership, in fact, you know, we came up with our economic recovery plan. We implemented, we had most of it done before they even finalized their plan. It took them 18 months to get this into action. So by the time they got it all stated, the COVID crisis was over. So, and then when I looked at the plan again, and I'm being as objective as I can about it, it didn't have a lot in there for us, like basically nothing. What we did immediately and how we reacted to it, we got great kudos from our business community, and thanks to Ian and your leadership. So that was money well spent to me, and I saw that. So it's very difficult because part of that deal with the funding is they have to come visit us, you know, annually and give us a report, and the reports are the same every year. And you have to look at from a value perspective. To me, I looked at it value for our taxpayers. You know, if we got some type of little value out of it somehow, there's some indirect stuff, but you can't even get your hands around it and try to measure it. And so that's why I have difficulty with SIP. And my feeling has always been that the city would be better off spending that $35,000 a year for other initiatives. Like we want to eventually, you know, implement our vision of Colwood Corners, you know, of the lands, our 50-year vision. And we would be better off having our own little Colwood displays and different shows and getting some acknowledgement of our city and you know, spending our money that way, or other initiatives that the Economic Prosperity Committee might come up with. That's how I feel about it. And, you know, it was such a hard thing for me to judge. And I really didn't want to speak to it tonight, but I just thought, let's just be honest about this. And because it is a lot of money. You know, when you think of it, you go 35,000, well, it's not that much money, but when you put it over the 3-year term, it's 107. We've already spent 107 times 2. We're already up almost $250,000. And I challenge anyone in this room to show me what we got for it. And so, you know, I'm just not a big fan. And because I was so biased about this, I had Mr. Grove go and look at it, and he came and looked at me. Don't know, you know. That's how I feel about it. I think, you know, there's some things in the strategic plan that within, you know, the economic prosperity plan that, you know, require funding, and I think we're better off spending it on that. Even if we had people come in and consult and do things to help us set ourselves up for future success, it's just a better way of spending our money. And I feel I can fully justify that with taxpayers, but right now I can't. I honestly cannot. So that's my frank opinion. Oh. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I was actually part of the delegation that attended their very first presentation and helped to promote SIP as a partnership for the region, for regional economic development. And I'm sure that we have benefited in some way from the economic development of our region, but there really is not a program that I could point to and say, oh, there it is. There's what really benefited Colwood. You know, the expression that SIP has used is that the rising tide floats all boats. And that's true. But it did absolutely nothing to deal with the municipal competition that exists within our region to try and achieve economic development, because it's every municipality's goal to have economic development. So I think it's really important that the dollars that we spend towards achieving economic development actually benefit the citizens of Colwood in a way that we can demonstrate to them. And so there's a lot of things that I think require some assistance in order to materialize the vision of this community, to have a walkable, bikeable community with amenities and businesses that we want to see and that we envision through our OCP. What our community would look like. And I really wanted SIP to succeed. I really championed them at this table and to succeed. And I think it's time to find a different approach. So I would like to move that we take no action at this time.
Councillor Day, Councillor Grove seconds it. I just want to add one question before we call the vote here. Have we leveraged them at all for any of, you know, the great grant funds that we receive here in Colwood? You know, the staff has been outstanding. Have we leveraged them at all for any of our grant funding?
Thank you for that question, Your Worship. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any, and now that that answer is not one that's based on a full remembering of all the years that we have been pursuing grants and been a partner with SIP. But I can't recall any off the top of my head.
I didn't think so, because from everything I recall, and I feel your pain. Actually, Councillor Day, I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I was a full supporter of them too. I can tell you, I was in there all the way to the point where Langford, the city of Langford at that time, with the mayor at the time, who threatened to take away our funding to the chamber because we joined the SIP at the time. And so we went in all the way, and I saw great promise because, you know, by this time we were supposed to be, the municipalities were no longer supposed to be supporting this because they were supposed to be self-supportive, you know, self-funding. They were supposed to have all the businesses join up to this. That was the model back then. They don't talk about that now. So even though the percentage of the funding has gone, I mean, if you look at the pie chart, because they get so much more project funding now, because they're leveraging off our dollars, the amount still coming from the municipalities hasn't changed. So, you know, I thought that would come down. That's why I guess I have problems with it. Anybody else have any questions on this whatsoever? So the motion is that we do nothing, which is, that means we're stopping, right? Is that what you mean? Okay, just wanted to make sure. And seconded by Councillor Grove. I will call the question. All those in favor? It's unanimous. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hear about this tomorrow. Okay, bylaws. Bylaw number 1921, land use bylaw amendment 2353, 2361, Sooke Road adoption. And there's a reason why this has taken a little while to get to adoption. And Mr. Earl, if you could just quickly explain that quickly, if you could. Or
Thank you, Mayor Kobayashi.
or
Our director, Yasmin Hernandez, can probably do a much better job of that.
Thank you, Mayor Kobayashi. So we've been working closely with the development group to facilitate the registration of the development agreement on title. But as council may remember, the property was formerly owned by Petro-Canada Suncor. So before you can register anything on title, the sale of the property had to go through. So that took several months for that to resolve. So once the sale of the property took place, then the registration of the development agreement was able to proceed, and that's why we're here tonight.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So may I have a motion for adoption? Councillor Jensen, seconder, Councillor Olsen. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Day is opposed. And Councillor Ward. The motion carries. 8.2 bylaw 1922 signed bylaw amendment CD 34 zone. May I have a motion for adoption? Motion for adopt. I'll make the motion then. Councillor Jensen. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Day.
Be reminded of the location for the signed bylaw amendment.
So the CD 34 zone is the zone for the car wash. And when we add a new CD zone to our land use bylaw, we need to assign it a sign district in the sign bylaw. So we are basically every time we add a city zone, we need to regulate signage on that city zone by adding it to the sign bylaw in the classification of which zones they land. So this particular city 34 zone would be sign district D, which is our mixed use employment center, where we would generally regulate those types of commercial industrial uses.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Okay, those opposed? Councillor Ward and Councillor Day, motion carries. Bylaw number 1971, Land Use Amendment Bylaw CD 37, Zone 3211 Jacklin Road. This is for third reading. May I get a motion to move the recommendation? Councillor Grove, seconder, Councillor Ward. Any discussion? Councillor Day?
I just was wondering why we're at third reading with this bylaw. Was there a condition that has been met, or it seemed to be quite a while since we saw reading 1 and 2?
I believe, generally speaking, we would need the development agreement register before proceeding to adoption. The reason we were delaying at third, I am not entirely sure. Sometimes it may just be that it took us a while to get it on the agenda, perhaps. It's not the information I don't have readily available as to why.
I personally will not be supporting a bylaw that I don't know if all the conditions have been met.
So it's 3211. Is that the corner of Jacklin? Right.
Yeah,
Corner of
it's
Jacklin and Sooke,
the
right?
corner of Jacklin and Sooke. So I can guarantee you that the planner that is in charge of this file wouldn't have put it on the agenda for third reading if the conditions that were associated with third reading weren't met. It may have been that we were waiting for an approved TIA prior to third reading. Ultimately, adoption is the one where we don't proceed unless the development agreement is signed and the Ministry of Transportation has given an okay. So it is between third and adoption that we complete a number of other steps.
So it may not be prudent for us to even consider this tonight if we don't know exactly what if we can't confirm what we're approving here. I kind of recall something. I remember doing the first and second reading. That was just last month, actually, I believe.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Yeah.
It's not that long ago. It's just the timing that it takes us to put something on the agenda. If I had the minutes of that meeting, we would know what conditions were placed prior to third reading, but I don't. What I can tell you is that between third reading and adoption, we do a referral to the ministry because they need to sign the bylaw. And that is part of the administrative steps that take place between third reading and adoption. So there is third reading, triggers a review by the Ministry of Transportation of the bylaw, and their signature is required prior to adoption.
Yeah. I personally don't feel comfortable with it myself. Now that you can't tell me what we're, what we were lifting here. I was hoping you'd at least be able to say what that was. Can you look up at the yeah. February 13th?
I don't. Okay, here we are. Yes. So the recommendation that council endorsed on February 13 included that prior to scheduling third reading of the bylaw, a traffic impact assessment be accepted to the satisfaction of City of Colwood. So that's the okay that we were waiting on from the engineering department prior to scheduling third reading. So this has been the delay between February 13 until today. We finally are able to come forward because the TIA has been approved. And now between now and adoption, the step is to refer, once council gives a third reading, it goes for an approval by the Ministry of Transportation. But the Ministry of Transportation will not give approval until a TIA has been accepted and received.
Okay. And you're going to confirm engineering has approved the TIA?
I know so, because if a planner placed it here for third reading, I know with confidence it has met the conditions of that February 13. And John can state as much.
Okay. Yeah. Councillor D.
Yeah, it's just concerning to me. There is a very short distance between where the entry, where the parking area is and the intersection. And it's a significant intersection, which also impacts the highway. So Department of Highways would have an interest in the functioning of the intersection at least. I don't know if they'll look at the distance from the intersection on, trying to think if it's still called Jacklin Road. It is still called Jacklin Road where its entrance is. So just concerning to me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor D. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Councillor Day is opposed. The motion carries. 8.4 bylaw number 1972, sign law bylaw amendment CD 37, third reading. This is related to it, right? Yeah, that's right. Okay. May I get a mover of the Councillor Jensen, seconder, Councillor Grove, discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Day opposes. Motion carried. Motion for adjournment. Councillor Ward. Councillor Olsen seconds. All in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone.